So can you give us an overview of your most recent book, Permission Granted?
So the book is about the Bible. It is 12 short chapters, and it is primarily topically arranged. So let me read. I can even just read to you some of the names of the chapters, if you will. So the first chapter is what the Bible is and is not. The second, 2 creation stories and other myths, what really happened in the garden, meaning the Garden of Eden, sex, who, what, and why. It's always a fun one to talk about with students. Violence, the language everyone understands. Cover-ups and edited stories, and I like to explain that one in terms of, for instance, if you're familiar with the story of Job, or actually let's talk about Jonah, that's better. The story of Jonah, most people end in chapter 2 where he's released from the belly of the fish, right? And he's on dry land. But there are 2 more chapters. Why don't we read those other 2 chapters, right? There's a reason we stop there and we're missing part of the point. So talking about stories like Samson, there's an element of the story of Samson that a lot of people are familiar with, but go read the story and you'll learn a good deal about Samson, a lot more than you probably wanted to know, but it's interesting. And so it's worth having a conversation or considering, why do we teach or only read perhaps edited versions of these stories? So I cover Mary Magdalene as well, and lots of characters like that, in terms of either misunderstandings about some of these characters or stories, or just that many of us grew up hearing an edited version, if you will. Biblical women, silent, submissive baby makers, born of a virgin, will the real Jesus please stand up? Was Paul the first Christian, and so forth. So those are most of the topics that are covered in the book. And so the book itself comes out of having taught this introduction to both testaments of the Christian Bible, what most people refer to as the Old Testament and the New Testament, and having worked through these conversations with people over and over again, and like I said, in a way that's inviting into a conversation, and to invite people to consider some of these elements about the Bible in an academic way, and then to incorporate that however they will from there, if that makes sense. And I would like to read part of the intro to you, just to kind of, I think it encapsulates the vision or the goal of the book really nicely. So while I'm not trying to offer to a reader everything that I gained in seminary or the subsequent years of PhD work, it is my intention to touch on the most salient points about the Bible that I have benefited from learning and thinking about. These are also what I have found to be some of the juiciest topics for people, based on the dozens of introduction to the Bible classes that I've taught. My 2 main goals are to invite you to engage your curiosity while reading passages from the Bible, and to consider the issues I raise as they relate to the Bible. Let all these things inform your thinking as you take the Bible into your own hands. For people of faith, these conversations sometimes initially involve a mixture of shock and uncertainty. The shock is usually due to never having heard the full story before and wondering why they hadn't. The uncertainty is usually due to being uncomfortable with the implications of this new information. For those of you feeling uncertain and uncomfortable, I would remind you of the 2 assurances that kept me afloat when I was first learning them in seminary, and that is this framework, I guess you could say, of you have a brain, God gave you a brain, so it has to be okay to use it. And if they are worth your devotion, God and the Bible can handle your intellectual pursuits. So that frames what I'm doing with this book.